The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The South Kesteven series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Welcome back to South Kesteven, everybody, for another week's worth of videos. Now, first things first, you'll notice I've had my hair cut. I'm looking quite sleek and slender this morning. Streamlined, shall we say that? Streamlined. Now then, it's a bit wet and miserable, but to be honest with you, this is going to clear off at some point today. So by the end of this week, it should be nice and sunny, hopefully. It's not at the moment, though, so this looks a little bit dull. But this church is very much brightening my mood at the moment. It's a very nice church, this. You'll find this one in the village and the parish of Pickworth. Pickworth, Picker's Farm. Let's continue with South Kesteven this week, and today I've brought you to the small village of Pickworth. This shouldn't be confused with the other Pickworth we covered a while ago. That one's in Rutland and had a lot to do with John Clare. This one's a little less involved with anyone of a poetic persuasion. Nonetheless, it still has a lot we can enjoy. Pickworth's name is Old English in origin. It comes from Pickersworth, meaning an enclosure or a farm belonging to a man called Picker. It was founded during the early Anglo-Saxon period, likely between the 7th and 9th centuries, on a piece of high ground to the west of the much larger Folkingham. Its medieval parish boundary suggests that the original estate was compact and centred on a single manor. Pickworth appears in the Domesday Book as a substantial rural settlement. It's listed with 40 households, which was quite a lot for a village in those days. In fact, the number places it in the upper tier of village sizes for the area. The entry also records a church, whilst most of the land was held by the Bishop of Lincoln and partly by lay lords. Later records from the 16th to 18th centuries describe a largely agricultural estate with open field farming. During the medieval period, Pickworth developed around a manor linked to the family that took its name from the village. The Pickworth family were associated with the major rebuilding of St Andrew's Church in 1356. That church is today the most important landmark here and well worth its Grade 1 listing. The major 14th century rebuilding produced its brooch spire, as well as its clerestory, its nave, its aisles and its chancel. The church also contains medieval wall paintings from 1380, a restored 14th century screen, medieval benches and a 14th century pulpit. Historic England notes the sedilia, piscina and several other 18th century memorials. None of that is to say Pickworth is all about the church. There used to be a pub here called the Bluebell and a chapel on the main village street. There was also a windmill to the north, which survives today as a short, sailless stump. Pickworth was once put on the map by our current King Charles. He made a visit to the place in 1988 after some royal engagements just down the road in Boston, and that gave the village brief national attention. Time for TVI to do the same thing, although I'm not royalty, of course. Let's go. Let's get started with the old windmill north of Pickworth, which stands today as a bare brick tower, but its working life was far more vigorous. Set on raised ground chosen for strong airflow across the Kesteven uplands, it was built in the early 1800s with a tapering brick shell, a timber cap and 4 sails. Inside, 3 simple floors were linked by ladders with the grinding stones on the middle level. White's Directory of 1826 mentions a miller in Pickworth, unnamed frustratingly, but as no other mill is recorded, the reference almost certainly points to this tower. The mill worked for several decades before declining in the late 1800s as steam-powered milling in places like Sleaford took over. Its cap disappeared in the early 1900s, and mid-20th century photographs show a roofless stump filling with vegetation. While many similar mills were demolished, this one survived and has now been restored as part of a modern house. Right, so I've driven down Mill Lane and we are now in Pickworth village properly. And behind me we can see the church, which you saw in the intro. That's our first major landmark here. Our first stop in the village is St Andrew's Church, one of the most striking medieval buildings in South Kesteven. Standing at the centre of Pickworth and listed Grade 1, it's noted for its rare wall paintings, early stonework and unusually complete medieval interior. The earliest fabric dates from the 1100s, when a small stone church was raised on a slight rise above the fields. The sturdy tub font, carved from a single block, survives from this first phase. Expansion followed in the 1200s with new aisles and an extended chancel, work recorded in the Lincolnshire Historic Environment Record and in Pevsner's Buildings of England. The most dramatic transformation came in 1356, when the Pickworth family rebuilt the church almost entirely. The date is carved on the chancel arch and can still be spotted inside. This ambitious project created the tall nave, clerestory, arcades, brooch spire and chancel that define the building today, all praised for their high-quality stonework. Inside, the highlight is the group of wall paintings from around 1380, uncovered during 1950s restoration. They include St Christopher, the Apostles and St Michael weighing souls. The church also preserves a 14th century screen, a medieval pulpit, early benches with carved ends, and original sedilia and piscina from the 1356 rebuilding. The manor house stands just a few steps from St Andrew's Church, occupying a site linked to Pickworth's manorial line since the Middle Ages. The original medieval residence has vanished, but documents tied to the Pickworth family confirm that the manorial focus remained here for centuries. A new house was in place by the 1600s, though the building you see today is mainly an 18th and early 19th century creation, built in stages using the warm local stone typical of Kesteven. During the 1800s, the house was occupied by farming families who held the position of lord, including the Pocklington and Welby families, noted in contemporary directories. Early Ordnance Survey maps from the 1900s show a footprint very close to the present one, with only a few outbuildings later removed. Although surprisingly unlisted, the manor house remains one of Pickworth's most significant historic buildings. Pickworth once had a pub, and this stone house at the next junction is the former Bluebell Inn. Its history is well recorded in directories, maps and heritage notes. White's Directory of 1856 lists a beer house in the village run by a local victualler, and by 1885 the name Bluebell appears, marking it as Pickworth's main drinking house. The building is a traditional Lincolnshire dwelling of coursed limestone rubble with a tiled roof. Its thick walls, sash windows and plain front suggests it began life as a farmhouse before being adapted as a pub. In the late 1800s, it served farm labourers working the surrounding fields, offering ale from towns such as Sleaford and Folkingham. The Bluebell remained open into the early 1900s. A beer house was still listed in 1919, and no other premises are known. By the mid-20th century, it had closed though, and today it's returned to private residential use. Okay, there's no pub anymore in Pickworth, but there is a pub night you can still attend here, and I've got proof of that. On this little green, little triangle, which is kind of in front of the pub, there's a sign here that says Pickworth Pub Night at the Village Hall this Friday, 7:30 p.m. Bring your own drinks. Bring your own drinks. That's not really a pub then, is it, if you're bringing your own drinks? But I guess it's kind of like the pub atmosphere. So let's go and find the Village Hall. So here's the green with this sign on it. If we head this way, it's kind of in this direction. Between here and the Village Hall though, there's another building I want to show you, and that's the old post office. Pickworth once had its own post office, and this limestone house is the building that served that role for over 100 years. By the late 1800s it was firmly established, providing a vital link to nearby towns. Built of traditional limestone rubble, it remains a distinctive feature of the village, even though it's long since returned to private use. Pickworth has had a village hall for over a century, but the building you see here is modern. The earliest firm reference appears in 1919, noting a village room used for meetings and events. That earlier hall was a limestone structure, now lost, and its exact location is uncertain. It may well have stood on the same site as this, but there are a few other plausible spots in the village. The old hall hosted wartime fundraising during the First World War, and later served the Home Guard in the Second. The present hall is modest, but then so is Pickworth, and it continues the long tradition of providing a practical space for local organisation. The village would feel somewhat incomplete without it. And on the other side of a little bridge, just after the village hall, you've got this nice little pond, which I didn't know was here actually before I got here. But this is looking quite good, isn't it? No ducks or waterfowl around at the moment, but I'm assuming they use this pond for ducking and bathing and drinking and all that kind of stuff like they usually do. They must all be hiding from me this morning, if there are any. A former Wesleyan Methodist chapel once stood at the western end of Pickworth's main street, though nothing is visible today. Its site is well recorded in directories, maps, chapel registers and heritage notes. It was built in 1847 and appears clearly on the 1887 and 1904 Ordnance Survey maps, shown with a small front yard and a limestone boundary wall. The chapel had a single entrance door, 2 tall front windows and a simple interior furnished with wooden benches. It hosted regular services, school meetings and seasonal events throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s. Use continued into the mid-20th century, but the chapel closed in the 1960s and fell into disrepair. It was later demolished, leaving only its footprint and fragments of walling. the village sort of comes to a stop there. There is a road that runs off to the right, but it doesn't go anywhere particularly exciting. So we are heading back the way we came, but I'm not going to take the same route back as I've walked so far, because at the old post office, if you turn right, there's a lane there called Shepton Lane, which basically loops around the sort of southern part of Pickworth and brings you out back at the old Bluebell pub, and that's what I'll do to finish, just so I've got most of the rest of the village into the video. Pickworth is a small parish with a long, well-layered past, and its buildings form a clear thread from its early days of settlement to the present. St Andrew's Church is by far and away the anchor, with its earliest stonework dating from the 1100s. The wall paintings from around 1380 give the church national importance, and the survival of the medieval screen, the pulpit and the benches adds a rare depth. Close by stands the manor house, a building shaped mainly in the 1700s and 1800s, but firmly linked to the Pickworth family. The old windmill adds an industrial note, and Pickworth's smaller buildings like the Bluebell and the old post office also carry some weight too. It all forms a compact but intriguing record of Pickworth's past, a well-preserved historical character that still feels distinctive today.
We stand by the walls our elders shaped, mortar on sleeves, dust in the air. Old beams gone, new ones waiting, each block placed with a vow we share. We guard what was left in our care, keeping faith with the ones before us. Stone by stone we lift it higher, voices strong as the daylight turns. All our toil keeps the spirit steady, while the tower leans toward the sky. Chisels strike with a steady rhythm, carved arcs forming above our heads. Light breaks through the open rafters, marking paths where the workers tread. We honor the craft we were taught, holding fast as the seasons shift. Stone by stone we lift it higher, voices strong as the daylight turns. All our toil keeps the spirit steady, while the tower leans toward the sky. We shape each arch with patient purpose, setting truth in the grain of oak. Every joint tells the weight we shoulder, every strike sends a pledge unspoke. We build so the place may endure,
guided still by the work begun.
Stone by stone we lift it higher, voices strong as the daylight turns. All our toil keeps the spirit steady, while the tower leans toward the sky. Stone by stone we lift it higher, voices strong as the daylight turns. All our toil keeps the spirit steady, while the tower leans toward the sky.
Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven once again. Now today I've got a very big village for you. One that's got a castle mound that once had a prison built on it. That's interesting, isn't it? Well, where I'm standing right now is not said castle mound. This is the local playing field, which is kind of a world away from anything that's in this place, really. It's about a half a mile from this down to the Georgian Market Square, which defines the centre of this village. Nonetheless, I'll put both things on the map, and I'll also talk about a giant Easter egg that was once built in this village. This is the wonderful village and parish of Folkingham. Folkingham, homestead of Focus people. Alright, today we're in the large village of Folkingham, where once upon a time a huge Easter egg was made, taller than most people watching this very video. We'll learn exactly where it was made during the course of our walk, but Folkingham has a lot more to speak of too. The name Folkingham is generally taken to derive from the Old English personal name Foca and means the homestead of Focus people. It began as an early Anglo-Saxon settlement positioned on a high promontory above some valleys with small streams in them. Its location is also between two Roman routes, King Street to the west and Mareham Lane to the east, and that suggests that the first organised settlement grew from where some older trackways converged. By the 9th and 10th centuries, it had developed into a royal centre. In Folkingham, there's an early medieval fortified enclosure on the southeastern side of the settlement, which probably originated before the Norman conquest. It's known it served as the administrative base of the Soak of Folkingham. The early church site on the higher ground to the northwest suggests a long-established religious focus too, with the village itself forming between the two sites. By the late Anglo-Saxon period, Folkingham had grown into a small town, with weekly markets and several annual fairs. Before the conquest, it had been held by Earl Morcar, but after 1066 it passed to Gilbert de Gand, a major Norman magnate. The Domesday Book notes extensive arable land, meadows, and a sizable population for the period. For a long time, this was a high-status place. After Doomsday, Folkingham became the seat of the de Beaumont family, who built a castle on the low ground southeast of the marketplace. The castle was later rebuilt in stone and remained a key manorial centre into the 14th century. Later, when the Clinton family were around, they constructed a substantial manor house in the 1660s using stone from the ruined castle. It was later purchased by the Heathcote family of Normanton in 1788. That family would reshape the marketplace, including the refacing of the immense Greyhound Inn and the creation of the wide formal streetscape that survives to this day. The Heathcotes improved local buildings and supported parish institutions. The marketplace remains one of the largest surviving Georgian squares in Lincolnshire, with several late 18th century houses and former coaching inns around it. It's well worth seeing, so without further ado, let's get our walking gear on and go for a stroll around this remarkable village. The first stop in Folkingham is the playing field on Walcott Lane, a modern space set aside for organised sport. It holds a full-size grass football pitch and a junior pitch, with the local authority running the site. Its pavilion and changing rooms support match days, and the lack of floodlights limits use after dark, but it still serves as Folkingham's main football ground. When the pavilion was built, an archaeological watching brief checked for earlier activity. Nothing turned up, confirming the land had no earlier use. So as I said at the top of this video, this playing field is a long way from the village centre here. It's really out on a limb. There's like a big housing estate between that field and where I'm actually going to start my walk, which is at the church. Now the church tower, you might just be able to see it. It's behind this tree. I don't know whether you can spot it, but it is there. It's kind of there. Now to get to that from here, we need to drive down a road through this big housing estate, and we'll begin our walk right there and into the Georgian Market Square. Haha. St Andrew's Church stands just north of the marketplace, its tall west tower rising over Folkingham for more than 800 years. The first church here was built in the late 1100s, and the dedication to St Andrew may link it to nearby Sempringham, where St Gilbert founded his great monastery. Folkingham had close ties with the Gilbertine order, so the choice of patron fits the area's early religious links. A fragment of that first building survives. It's a Norman pier on the north side of the chancel, marking the position of an opening into a former chantry chapel. By the early 1200s, the chancel had been rebuilt in the early English style, giving the church its tall lancets and slender internal shafts. Further work followed in the 1300s. Early decorated arcades with flowing tracery and carved capitals were added, forming the core of the nave. The 1400s brought the large west tower, whose tall belfry openings and four pinnacles became the church's defining features. Two pinnacles were blown down in a 2006 storm, one crashing through the roof and causing more than £100,000 worth of damage. Inside, the church holds a 15th century carved chancel screen and a vaulted south porch, with an upper room and a fireplace, hinting at a past use for meetings or storage. Outside stand the remains of stocks and a whipping post, while the churchyard contains two First World War graves recorded by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. St Andrews remains one of South Kesteven's most significant historic buildings. Entering the marketplace, it's impossible to miss the huge facade of the Greyhound, one of Folkingham's most important buildings for more than 350 years. The earliest parts date from around 1650, when it opened as a substantial coaching inn. That first phase survives in the southern block of the Western Range, where 17th century fire surrounds remain. Its position on the old north to south route through the village also hints at its original purpose. Alterations took place in the 1730s, but the major transformation came in 1788 and 1789, when the trustees of Sir Gilbert Heathcote spent £4,000 on a full remodelling. That created the striking red brick facade, the 7-bay frontage, and the stone-lined carriage archway that still define the building today. The new look gave the inn a formal presence suited to its expanding role. Alongside its work as an inn, the Greyhound housed an assembly room and an assize court. The assembly room hosted popular penny readings in the 1800s, while the assize court handled the fortnightly magistrates' court and the quarter sessions. Brass studs marked the position of the dock, witness box and justice's bench, and a stairway led down to a prisoner's hall. In 1818, the Greyhound gained yet another function, a savings bank, operating every Thursday from noon to 1 p.m. Unusual as it sounds, the building's judicial role made it a surprisingly secure place for deposits. Today, the Greyhound is divided into apartments, but its dramatic exterior remains one of Lincolnshire's most impressive sights, backed by a rich, well-recorded past. This is the village shop at number 33 Marketplace, one of Folkingham's oldest continuously occupied commercial buildings. It began as a 17th century ironstone house, and that early structure still forms the core of the shop today. Originally a domestic dwelling, its prominent position facing the square made it a natural candidate for later commercial use. In the early 1800s, the building received a new rendered brick frontage, part of the wider improvements made to the marketplace after the Heathcote family purchased the manor in 1788. The refacing helped integrate number 33 into the more formal Georgian layout they created. Now, the exact date of conversion into a shop is unknown, but it was certainly trading by the early 1900s. Since then, it's served as Folkingham's principal general store, changing hands many times, but never its purpose. Its central location and steady footfall have ensured its long survival. The marketplace at Folkingham is the clearest surviving sign of the village's former importance. Its long, linear plan, Georgian facades and traces of lost structures give it a sharply defined historic character, far more substantial than the average village centre. The square began to form after Folkingham received a market charter in 1239, creating a trading hub for the surrounding area. Early accounts describe a narrow space lined with buildings on both sides, the heart of local commerce. By the 1700s, it held a market cross, a town hall, a butchery, and even a central pond. The cross survived into the early 1800s before being removed during the major redesign of the 1790s. The Heathcote family's investment reshaped the entire square, rebuilding facades, straightening building lines, and creating the broad Georgian space seen today, now used as a car park. Folkingham once hosted 7 annual fairs and weekly markets here, drawing traders, livestock dealers, and travelling sellers. This compact space also combined trade, justice, and administration. A house of correction stood on the eastern side directly opposite the town hall, before being replaced by a later one at the castle. The Five Bells Care Home at number 28 Marketplace began as a 17th century limestone house with a slate roof, its early structure still forming the core of the building you see here. It later became the Five Bells Inn, altered in the late 1700s with updated rooms that prepared it for a long spell as one of Folkingham's busiest coaching inns. The inn closed in 1914 after more than 2 centuries of trade. A new phase followed, first a restaurant, then further 20th century alterations. In the early 2000s, it was converted into the Five Bells Residential Care Home, providing places for up to 28 residents. Despite its changing roles, the building retains the historic fabric that shaped its long life. You can tell just by looking around this marketplace that there were more shops than just the one I've shown you. The one behind me here, this house here, this was definitely a shop. You can tell by the frontage. You wouldn't get windows like that on a normal house. There's another one over the road, very similar. Can you see here behind the tree and the phone box, there's one with a red door? I'd wager that was a shop at some point as well. Now there is another business in this marketplace, which we're going to talk about next. It's over here. Now, as a chocoholic, this is easily my favourite building in this village. Hanson's Chocolate House at number 13 Marketplace began life as a coaching inn, with its long frontage, carriage access and internal divisions still visible in early photographs and heritage notes. The original inn name is lost, but its layout survived well into the 20th century. Its modern story starts with Jan Hansen, a chocolatier who worked across Europe and the Middle East before turning to luxury confectionery. He opened his first shop in Stamford in 1986, moved to Billingborough in 1988, and finally relocated to Folkingham in 2005. Here, he established Hanson's Chocolate House, a working chocolate-making workshop known for handmade truffles, pralines, and seasonal creations. Now, one of its most memorable feats was producing a 7-foot-tall Easter egg to raise funds for St Barnabas Hospice. It was an impressive creation, even for the most dedicated chocolate lover. The manor house at number 8 Marketplace was built in the 1650s, most likely by Theophilus Clinton, the 4th Earl of Lincoln, for his son Edward on the occasion of his 1652 marriage to Lady Anne Hollis. Originally known as Clinton House, it was constructed from Ancaster limestone with a Collyweston slate roof. Much of its stone is thought to have come from the ruins of Folkingham Castle, with some possibly sourced from Sempringham Priory. A map from around 1700 shows an orchard to the north, later built over as the settlement expanded. The Heathcote family altered the house during their major estate improvements, updating its gates and its layout, and their influence remained into the Victorian period. When the Folkingham estate was sold in 1920, the manor house fetched £5,600. It returned to the market in 2015 for just over £1 million, reflecting its Grade 2 listed status and long, well-documented history. This is Folkingham's old school. Now, the earliest reference to organised education in the village dates to 1713, when a free school was founded to provide basic instruction long before national schooling. That first building has not survived, but it paved the way for the later National School. The present structure was built in 1875 to accommodate 130 pupils, and it's now Grade 2 listed, first designated in 1968 and amended in 1987. Its steeply pitched roof and Gothic influence detailing are typical of late 19th century school design. The Aveland Archive preserves photographs of pupils and staff from 1900, 1927 and 1953, showing the school in active use across several generations. By the late 20th century, the school had closed and the building was converted for new purposes, including offices. Despite those changes, its external appearance remains largely intact, preserving its place in Folkingham's educational history. Right, okay, now to take a right turn briefly because we're heading for the village hall, which is currently behind the camera. When I'm done with the village hall, we're then heading off to the castle mound, which means coming back into the marketplace briefly so I can pick up a footpath that runs behind these houses here and leads us directly onto the castle mound. It's still raining, so hopefully it's not too muddy underfoot. Folkingham's Village Hall sits just off the marketplace on West Street, and it served as the main public meeting building for more than 100 years. The earliest reference to the site appears in 19th century directories, which record a reading room used for meetings, lectures and organised activities. This building is widely regarded as the basis of the later Village Hall. During the Second World War, the hall hosted Home Guard meetings and ration-related announcements. In the 1960s and 1970s, it was upgraded with new heating, improved lighting and a small stage. It was formally registered with South Kesteven District Council as a public venue in 1982, and by the 1990s it was regularly used by local groups, including the Women's Institute. Today it remains Folkingham's principal indoor venue, its long development and clear documentary trail giving it a firmly established place in the village's history. Folkingham Castle is one of the village's most dramatic historic sites. The medieval stronghold once dominated the eastern side of the settlement, standing on a moated platform with powerful earthworks. It served as the seat of the de Gaunt and later the de Beaumont families, before falling out of use by the 16th century. Abandonment left only the moat and banks, but these later became the setting for one of Lincolnshire's most striking penal buildings. The first House of Correction, as we already know, stood in the marketplace, containing 4 cells, a day room and harsh conditions. Prisoners there slept on straw, and one black painted cell with drilled air holes was classed as a dungeon. By the late 1700s, inspectors condemned that building as damp and cramped, prompting the construction of a new House of Correction in 1808 inside the castle moat. It was intended to serve all of Kesteven. The new prison cost far more than expected, an estimated £2,862 in 1807, rising to £8,299 by 1825 after some enlargement. Its architect was Brian Browning, the later designer of Bourne's Sessions House. He charged £457 for his work. That seems quite cheap. The most striking feature of it was the monumental entrance gateway of 1825, inspired by Vanbrugh, Saint Michel and Le Dos. It housed the turnkey and the governor's horses and carriage, projecting authority and warning. Inside, the regime followed strict sharp shock principles. Short-term prisoners slept on wooden planks, longer-term inmates received a mattress only after a month. Diets were limited to bread and gruel, with small additions for longer sentences. Expansions followed. 20 new cells came along in 1849 and a west wing came along in 1852, raising its capacity to around 70 inmates. The prison closed in 1878. By 1880, the inner buildings had been converted into cottages, which survived until the 1960s. Only the gateway remains today, rescued in 1965 and transferred to the Landmark Trust in 1982. It now stands above the moated enclosure. It's an impressive survivor of both the castle and the prison. Okay, so now we're heading back towards the village centre, but we're not going into the centre again. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to make our way around the southern edge of it so that we can get to the old rectory and an old chapel. Now on the way, there's not really much to see. It's effectively just like a barren section where there's no houses, no buildings or anything like that. But there is a small watercourse which forms a ford across a road. This quieter corner of Folkingham is shaped by a small stream that's influenced the village for far longer than any surviving building. It cuts a shallow valley along the southern side of the settlement, and here we have a crossing point over a road, which is a ford. The stream runs east to west, and the ford lays on the old route that later became West Street and Sleaford Road. That route linked the Roman roads King Street and Mareham Lane, placing the crossing on an important east to west line long before the village took its modern form. Medieval maps and later estate plans show the stream forming the southern boundary of the castle site and feeding its moat, a link confirmed in topographical descriptions. Today, the watercourse still follows its historic line. The ford survives too, now accompanied though by a bridge, and the shape of the village continues to echo this modest but influential feature. The old Methodist chapel on Chapel Lane is one of Folkingham's best documented nonconformist buildings. Methodism arrived in the village early in the 1800s, and although a small Wesleyan meeting house existed before 1841, it soon proved inadequate. A new purpose-built chapel was therefore constructed in 1841, a date still recorded on the surviving stone here. It was designed and built by local builder Thomas Kelso. It was a simple brick structure with a pan-tile roof and a single worship space. In 1845, a gallery was added, raising its capacity to around 150. The East Gallery still retains its original box pews, minus their doors. As was typical for Wesleyan chapels in small Lincolnshire villages, it never had a graveyard. The final service took place here in 1974. The chapel then became a furniture restorer's workshop in 1978, and then a private house from 1995 onwards. The New Inn on West Street has its origins in the 1830 Beer House Act, which allowed householders to sell beer without a full licence. Matthew Sharp opened it in 1831, and by 1834 another family member, William Sharp, was running a second beer house called the Crown nearby. The New Inn occupies two late 18th century red brick cottages with pan-tile roofs, later adapted to form Sharp's beer house and eventually a public house. It remained part of the manorial estate through the 1800s, and when the estate was sold in 1920, the New Inn was still trading, marking almost 90 years of continuous use as a beer house. The old rectory on West Street was built in around 1800 from limestone rubble with ashlar dressings and a hipped slate roof. It served as the residence of the rector of Folkingham, whose living was historically linked with nearby Lawton. A notable chapter for this came in 1826 when schoolmaster C.E. Wellborn moved the village's free school, previously held in St Andrew's Church, into the rectory. He built a schoolroom and a dwelling at his own expense, and these survive today as the rectory's garage. The school admitted both free and fee-paying pupils, but declined rapidly, closing in 1856. The Aveland Archive also records an earlier rectory, demolished after the Second World War. Its stone was shipped to America and rebuilt, and the site now forms part of the Millennium Green. So if you walk beyond the rectory, you're faced with this view. These white houses that lead out of Folkingham towards Pickworth and the other villages that are just to the west of it. But you saw those in the intro, so there's no need to see those again. We're going up here. It's a footpath that leads back to the entrance to the church. Now when we get in the car, we've got one more thing to cover. We need to drive to the south of the village now to have a look at Folkingham's water tower. On the southern parish boundary stands Folkingham's water tower, a concrete structure whose site has supplied water far longer than its modern appearance would suggest. Its development is unusually well documented, giving a clear sequence from the late 1800s to today. The earliest attempt to secure a reliable water supply involved a windmill used during the 19th century to pump water in dry spells. Photographs show it survived until shortly before 1930, when it was demolished due to age and inefficiency. In 1939, an iron water tower was built on the same high point, providing Folkingham with its first modern storage system. It served throughout the Second World War and for decades afterwards, offering better pressure and reliability than the windmill. By the early 1980s, the iron tower was outdated. In 1983, it was replaced by the present concrete tower, built directly on the same footprint. A second major structure appeared nearby in 1982, a 70-foot high, 54,000-gallon futuristic-style reservoir designed to support the Bourne area and stabilise supplies during shortages. Today, the concrete tower remains one of Folkingham's most visible landmarks. Its height, stark form and elevated position make it instantly recognisable to anyone approaching from the south or the east, and its long development gives it a surprisingly rich backstory. Folkingham stands out because its past is written directly into its buildings, its streets and its earthworks. The parish holds an unusually dense run of historic sites, each one carrying a clear purpose and a firm place in the village's long development. At the eastern edge, the castle platform and the House of Correction gateway form the parish's most dramatic pairing. The medieval earthworks set the stage, but the 1808 to 1825 prison buildings gave the site its surviving architectural punch. The marketplace acts as the spine here. Around it stand the buildings that powered village life, like the Greyhound and the village shop. But my favourite is Hanson's Chocolate Factory. Let me know below, could you tackle a 7-foot tall Easter egg?
Stone walls pressing on every side, cold floors marked by the ones before. I hear carts roll across the square, shadows stretch beneath the olden door. Magistrates stride through the archway, brass studs gleam where the bench once stood. Outside traders gather at first light, while I wait where the stocks once stood. This place holds more than the weight of bars. It keeps the shape of all who pass through. I stand where justice carved its mark, where the square keeps watch on every soul. The law moves on beyond these walls, I remain beneath its heavy gaze. Fairs once filled this ground with noise, livestock penned where the crowds would meet. Now the pond is gone, the cross long lost, but the air still hums with restless feet. The great facade stares across at me, red brick proud in its ordered line. Coaches once rolled under its arch, while I count the hours that aren't mine. This place holds more than the weight of bars. It keeps the shape of all who pass through. I stand where justice carved its mark, where the square keeps watch on every soul. Though the world moves on beyond these walls, I remain beneath its heavy gaze. I stand where justice carved its mark, where the square keeps watch on every soul. Though the world moves on beyond these walls, I remain beneath its heavy gaze. Still held by streets that never sleep.
Welcome back to South Kesteven again, folks, and today to a village where a set of monks once had a very important job to do. You see, to get between South Kesteven and South Holland once upon a time, there was only really one way to do it, and that was to use something called the Holland Bridge Causeway. And there was a priory in this place where the monks oversaw that causeway. This is Horbling. Horbling, the people of Horber. Next up in South Kesteven we have the lovely little village of Horbling, which occupies one of the parishes that run along the district's eastern edge. Horbling is a mainly residential village and it's elongated, stretching a long way from north to south. The name was first recorded in the Domesday Book as Horblinge. Most scholars link it to Old English or Old Norse roots. One interpretation is that it means the people of Horber, or the settlement of Horber's followers. Another view is that it may derive from a personal name combined with a topographic reference to low marshy land near the edge of the fens. After all, that idea does have a bit of credence to it, because Horbling isn't far from that expanse of what is now flat, fertile farmland. Naming aside, there's little doubt that Horbling began as an early Anglo-Saxon settlement on a patch of slightly raised ground beside the fens. Its position is also near the ancient Car Dyke, the major Roman waterway, and so it would have been well suited for farming and the movement of goods. Archaeological evidence would also indicate that Horbling might have been settled even before that. Earthworks and rectilinear enclosures on Horbling Fen point to a Romano-British settlement, with finds including Samian ware and roof tiles. By the 10th and 11th centuries, the settlement had developed enough to support a church, agricultural land, and a small population. The presence of a medieval priory at Bridge End later gave Horbling some local religious importance. The priory was Gilbertine and dedicated to St Saviour. It was founded in 1199 by Godwin the Rich of Lincoln. It only had limited resources and probably housed only 2 or 3 canons. Its main duty was maintaining the Holland Bridge Causeway to Horbling's east. The priory was dissolved long before the main dissolution of the monasteries, and by the late 18th century its remains had been dismantled to build a farmhouse. Nothing remains of it now, but its very presence does give Horbling an interesting historical edge. In the village itself, Horbling contains several notable historic buildings. St Andrew's Church is the principal one. It was originally Norman and still retains a Norman chancel with round-headed windows. Other listed buildings include Horbling Hall, the old vicarage, the Plough Inn, and a former school of 1845. Horbling has not produced many nationally known figures, but several individuals have had long local significance, including members of the Brown family. They are a good thing to begin with. Brown's Church of England Primary School has one of the longest educational traditions in South Kesteven. It began in 1691, founded as a free school for local children. By the mid-1800s, the original building was worn out, so in 1845, Reverend Edward Brown funded a full rebuild on the High Street. That Victorian school, later known as Brown's Free School, served Horbling's children throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s. By the 1950s, it was overcrowded and no longer suitable for modern teaching. In 1957, the High Street School and the Schoolmaster's House were converted into homes, and a new school opened to replace them. That modern successor is the building you see here on Sandygate Lane. Okay, so from the school it's a bit of a walk to get to the church, but that's next. So we're heading up Sandygate Lane. It's a bit bendy, as you can see here. There's a bend in the road there, and then it bends back round to the left in a moment, and the church is the next thing on the list. This is St Andrew's Church, another of the many local dedications to that saint. Its fabric preserves work from the late 1100s through to the Victorian period, giving it one of the richest architectural timelines in the area. The earliest features appear on the west front, where fragments of a Norman blind arcade survive, complete with cushioned capitals and round arches. Although partly cut by a later window, the original layout is still easy to read. The Norman builders used limestone and ironstone rubble, materials typical of this part of Lincolnshire. In the mid-1200s, the church was enlarged with new aisles and transepts. The north aisle gained a pointed doorway with filleted shafts and moulded capitals, while the south aisle received matching buttresses. In around 1330, the building was reshaped again. The north aisle was rebuilt with tall ogee-headed windows and crisp tracery, and the nave gained a large 5-light west window with transomes and panel tracery. Further work in the 1400s added battlements, new roof lines, and improved clerestory lighting, giving the church much of its present outline. Victorian restorations in 1852, 1877 and 1879 repaired roofs, renewed windows and stabilised the fabric. St Andrews was listed Grade 1 on the 30th of October 1968. Next we come to Horbling Hall, standing on the west side of the main village street. It's a Grade 2 listed building, valued for its strong architectural character and its remarkably well-preserved Victorian design. Built in around 1860 in limestone ashlar and coursed rubble, it looks impressive from the outside, but the interior is the real highlight. The entrance hall is described as magnificent, with its original tiled floor and a fine mahogany staircase. Unlike St Andrews or the former priory, the hall is not medieval, but it marks a period of new investment in village houses linked to agricultural prosperity. Trade directories note several substantial homes in Horbling, yet the hall consistently stands out. It remains in excellent condition today. So we've seen the current Brown School, and now we reach the one that came before it. This is the old school on the High Street, built in 1845 and funded by Reverend Edward Brown, a descendant of the original founder. Constructed in red brick with limestone ashlar dressings, it shows the classic mid-19th century Lincolnshire look, with a steep slate roof, stone-coped gables, kneelers and finials. Attached to it is the former schoolmaster's house, built at the same time and sharing the same materials. Together they form a single Victorian group, now divided into 2 private homes. The school was enlarged in 1892 as pupil numbers rose, and by 1919 it could hold 120 children, though the average attendance was only about 53. Even so, numbers must have increased sharply because overcrowding eventually forced the move into the new school. The old building's exterior remains largely unchanged, making it easy to imagine how tight the space once was. Okay, we've got a parish notice board opposite the old school, so you know what that means by now, people. There's a card going on the board, and that is Horbling in the books. Horbling's only pub today is the Plough Inn, and it's one of the most unusual pubs in Lincolnshire, not for its size or its age, but instead for its ownership. This is the last pub in England to be owned by a parish council. The earliest reference to an inn called the Plough appears in an 1811 notice in the Lincoln, Rutland and Stamford Mercury. It advertised the letting of a pub of that name with 34 acres of land, but it wasn't this building, it was its predecessor. At that time it was run by Francis Root, a farmer publican. The notice also announced plans to demolish the old inn and build a new one in early 1812. That rebuild went ahead, costing just over £565, and produced the structure you can see here on Springwell Lane. It's mainly a brick building with later alterations, typical of rural pubs of its era. What makes it exceptional though is how it came into parish hands. The story begins with a legal purchase dated 11th of December 1700, when Horbling's overseers of the poor bought 3/4 of a cottage and 2 acres of land for the sole and only use and benefit of the inhabitants of Horbling forever. The remaining quarter was acquired in 1804. Those lands later formed the estate from which the parish council gained authority over the inn. When parish councils were created in 1894, Horbling's new council inherited responsibility for the Plough as a result. It still holds that role today. The pub retained its 1812 structure too, and it gained a Grade 2 listing in 1987. So the road we're on here is called Spring Lane, and this is the reason why it gets that name. Check this out. Isn't this lovely? Now there's a plaque here that tells you what this is. So let's go and have a read, shall we? Get through these gates. Here we go. So this reads, in 1711, the constables of Horbling paid £9, 15 shillings and 5d to Anthony Ashley of Stamford to construct this well and maintain it for 20 years. In January 1998, the wells were restored by F. Bowman and Sons of Stamford at a cost of £5,600 using parish funds and grant assistance. So this is basically a spring well. And isn't it beautifully maintained? It's very deep as well. If I just show you here, if I just stand over the top of it, you can see just how far down this thing goes. That is quite deep water in there, people. It's brilliant, and this is why the road is called Spring Lane. Beautiful feature of Horbling, and I think probably its centrepiece, quite frankly. Okay, so from here, it's basically all residential. If you keep following Spring Lane, it takes you back onto the main road through the village, and we are just going to walk from here around the rest of the sort of northern sections before looping back using a footpath to get back towards the church and Sandygate Lane. So this is really now just going to be a big montage of all the houses and things that are left in the village from the Springwell back to the start. Horbling has two small hamlets to the east of the main village. The best known is Bridgend, which we're about to drive into and out of again. It's kind of a blink and you'll miss it sort of place, but it holds one of Horbling's most intriguing stories. Bridgend once had a Gilbertine priory, also known as St Saviour's Priory. It stood about 1.5 miles east of Horbling and was a small religious house with a very specific purpose. Its history is unusually well recorded for such a modest site. The priory was founded in or before 1199 by Godwin the Rich of Lincoln, who had already supported the Gilbertines at Sempringham. He granted the Chapel of St Saviour, along with land and tenements, to establish a house for canons. The foundation charter required the canons to maintain the Holland Bridge Causeway, a vital raised route across the fens. The causeway, which followed an old Roman line, linked Horbling with Donington and remained the only dependable road between South Kesteven and South Holland until the 1700s. The priory was always small, housing only 2 or 3 canons supported by lay brothers. Their duty to maintain the causeway led to repeated disputes. In the mid-1200s, royal jurors accused them of neglect, even after securing a papal bull in 1263 to collect funds. In 1445, a fire destroyed the church and other buildings, and the priory never fully recovered. It later became a dependent cell of Sempringham and was surrendered with it in 1538. After the dissolution, the site declined quickly. By the late 1700s, the priory had been dismantled and its stone was reused for a farmhouse. Today, no standing remains survive. Shallow earthworks, soil marks and reused stone at Priory Farm are the last traces of the Gilbertine house that once guarded the causeway. And lastly, we reach Horbling Fen, lying to the east of the village. It has one of the richest archaeological records in South Kesteven, shaped by farming, drainage and long-distance movement across the fen edge. This area contains some of the most important Romano-British remains around here. Surveys suggest a settlement centred on Fen Drove and Fen Farm, with rectilinear earthworks, watercourses and enclosure systems visible across the fen. Those features appear in the listing for the scheduled Roman settlement at Fen Farm, active in the 2nd century AD, with farmsteads arranged along a drove and fields set out in a planned pattern. Now, of course, as you might imagine, finds have always been plentiful out here. Samian ware, coarse pottery and Roman roof tiles all confirm this was a lived-in zone, not just grazing land. A possible Roman trackway near Horbling Fen Drove has been suggested, though not confirmed. The only certain route is the line now followed by the A52, once part of Salters Way. Prehistoric activity is also recorded, including a tumulus near the Horbling-Billingborough road. Later, the fen, once little more than a swamp, was drained, with channels maintained to keep the land workable. As drainage improved, the old causeway maintained by the canons at Bridgend became less critical. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the fen was fully enclosed and mapped. Today, Horbling Fen remains a working agricultural area. And that's Horbling, folks, and this is a village that stands out because its history is written into every corner of the village we've just seen. Each site we've explored adds a different layer too. The earliest activity lies out on Horbling Fen, where Roman farmsteads, trackways and enclosure systems once lined Fen Drove. By the late 1100s, Horbling had a stone church, St Andrew's, with a Norman west front that still survives today. To the east stood the Gilbertine Priory at Bridgend, founded before 1199 by Godwin the Rich. The only dependable route between Kesteven and Holland for long periods was the causeway. Domestic architecture adds further depth. Horbling Hall, Brown's School and the last parish-owned pub in England make Horbling stick out. It's a wondrous place, full of unusual historical assets.
We walk the edge where the wet fields meet, stone underfoot, wind pulling at our cloaks. Our house is small, our charge is wide, we keep the raised road firm above the mire. Godwin's gift set our path in place, a chapel, a plot, a vow we still uphold. 2 or 3 souls, yet the weight is vast, guarding the way that binds 2 shires. Roman lines guide the shape beneath, old tracks hidden under plow and crop. We read the ground as others read books and mend the way when storms tear through. We are the watchers on the causeway, keeping the high road clear through the fen, where wagons roll and travelers pass, where the marsh would swallow all without care. We stand by the stones, by the timber and turf, holding the root that carries the world. Our house is small, yet our duty is wide, for this path is the spine of the land. And we guard it still. Royal men once judged our work, saying the ruts were deep, the banks too worn. We sought aid in distant halls, yet still we patched the sinking edge. Fire once took our church and hall, ash on the air beams falling in the night. We built again, though never as before. Our strength held, though our walls did not. Sempringham called and we bowed our heads, a smaller voice within a greater house. Yet the causeway stayed our charge, and we kept it firm through every season. We are the watchers on the causeway, keeping the high road clear through the fen, where wagons roll and travelers pass, where the marsh would swallow all without care. We stand by the stones, by the timber and turf, holding the root that carries the world. Our house is small, yet our duty is wide, for this path is the spine of the land. And we guard it still. We guard the causeway through the fen, a narrow path, a burden shared. Our house is small, our vow is strong. We keep the way, we keep the way. Salvator dirigernos, via firma serviamus, sempiternum lumen dubnos, custodes viarum sumus.
Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven once again for the biggest village I've got for you this week, and this truly is a big one. There's loads of things to talk about here. Did you know that in this village there used to be a factory that made feather pillows and mattresses and stuff like that? It does still exist, but these days it's less about feathers and more about foam and fibre. You'll find it in Billingborough. Billingborough, fort of Bill's followers. Today on TVI we're in a big village and it goes by the name of Billingborough. This one is linked to early English and Scandinavian naming patterns. One explanation is that it gets its title from the Old English billingers, meaning the people or followers of a man called Bill. Another theory suggests a link to a Saxon word for a fishery, possibly referring to early water features in the area. A further idea connects the name to a Billinge tribe, active in Anglo-Saxon and Viking periods. Billingborough likely formed as a small Anglo-Saxon settlement near a series of natural springs that provided reliable water. Later known as the Spring Wells, the modern version of them is what gives Billingborough its best focal point today. The Spring Wells are in the middle of the village, but around them there's a place with far more to enjoy today, which is all developed from a former Roman villa on the edge of it all. After the Roman withdrawal, the area remained populated. By the early medieval period, what became Billingborough formed part of a dense cluster of settlements, including the now lost village of Ousby and the reduced settlement of Burthorpe, which still exists today in the form of a modern farming hamlet. Although the Doomsday text for Billingborough is pretty brief, it records land, households and resources typical of a medium-sized rural holding in late 11th century Lincolnshire. Medium-sized is certainly not how you would describe this one now. In the medieval and early modern periods, Billingborough's manorial structure followed the pattern of many Lincolnshire villages. The Old Hall, one of the oldest surviving buildings, became the seat of the Toller family, a prominent local lineage active in the 16th and 17th centuries. The Tollers were not alone. Billingborough was also home to tradespeople and entrepreneurs such as Tolly McCann, founder of a local feather processing business known as the Feather Factory, which operated into the 20th century. Billingborough's most prominent landmark today is St Andrew's Church, dating mainly from the 14th century, with a tall spire rising to about 150 feet. The church includes decorated and perpendicular Gothic elements, a vaulted tower roof, and a clerestory added in the 15th century. Then there's the imposing figure of the old Harrison's Corn Merchants Warehouse, the former railway station, and the brewery that was tied to it, and the ever-important Spring Wells, which is the highlight of a village that just oozes rural character. Let's go and see it all. Let's start with this playing field, which actually sits just over the border into Horbling, though it feels like part of Billingborough because it links straight into the village. Sport has been played here for a long time, and Billingborough's cricket record is one of the oldest in the Aveland area. Today's ground is home to Horbling and Billingborough Cricket Club. The first version of the club is usually dated to 1876, but the current line begins in 1889, playing on a pitch laid out in Edward Smith's Field on Horbling Road. That ground was later absorbed into the short-lived Aveland Golf Links, which pushed cricket aside for a few years. Cricket returned in 1897, though the club had to avoid Edward Smith's Field because a golf green sat too close to the square. When the golf club folded in 1904, cricket moved back. By 1925, the pitch had been enlarged and extra seating was added, with regular match reports in the local press. Two later players stood out: Eric Houghton, who became an Aston Villa star, and Reg Goodacre, who went on to play for West Ham United. Across the Victoria Bridge from the playing field lies Victoria Bank, and this was the site of one of Billingborough's earliest nonconformist buildings. It was a chapel which stood on the south bank of the Ousmere Lode, close enough to the bridge for locals to call it the Bridge Chapel. It was built around 1786 by a Calvinistic Baptist group. It was a small brick structure measuring 33 by 27 feet. By the mid-1800s it was well established. The 1904 Ordnance Survey map still labels it as a Baptist chapel, and in 1909 it received what sources called a much-needed restoration. The chapel closed in 1947 but remained standing for several decades. It was demolished by the 1970s, leaving no visible trace, though its early date and riverside setting are still remembered today. Billingborough Primary School traces its firmest early record to 1919, which noted a council school built in 1876 for about £2,700 and designed for 400 children, though attendance sat usually at around 141. The 1876 building replaced earlier schooling in the village. The Aveland Archive records a free school in the 1600s linked to the Toller family, followed by a board school on Victoria Road in the late 1800s. Those earlier efforts fed directly into the later council school system, which evolved into the modern primary school you see here. Early photographs of this add colour to its history. A 1920s class image shows pupils with headmaster Mr Judson, whilst a 1930s group photograph captures another full school. Together they underline the school's importance in early 20th century Billingborough. Later development ran alongside Aveland Secondary School, opened in 1963 and demolished in 2009. Though separate, both schools served the same children as they moved through local education. Now, opposite the school, there's a very interesting row of houses. Let me show you them. Red brick terrace. I think there's 6 houses. I think, in this terrace, and they're called low nests. Both ends of the terrace have got a stone in the wall, one there and one the other end, that say low nests. And in the middle, there's a plaque, another stone if you like, and it says, if you can't read this, in memory of faithful parents, erected 1914. I wonder what the story is behind these. It's got to be something. This next building, also on Victoria Street, is the George and Dragon, a former 17th century coaching inn built in colour-washed limestone rubble. It sits on the old route to Boston, which was once a busy line for horse-drawn travel, and so this soon became a place where local business was done. Tolls from nearby gates were let by auction inside the inn, and the tollgate trustees held their annual meeting here. It also hosted inquests, while the yard and paddock behind became a lively events space. The 1880s brought its most dramatic change. After 53 years, long-serving landlady Sarah Johnson retired and the inn was sold and refurbished. By 1907, it was promoted as a commercial and family hotel. The inn had already gained a reputation for entertainment. There were fairs, travelling theatricals, waxworks, and even circuses, which appeared here. When Wombwell's Menagerie visited in 1886, Billingborough's schoolchildren were given the day off to attend. In the early 1930s, the George and Dragon adapted again, advertising space for large lorries and accommodation for cyclists. It remained a social base for groups such as the Old Friendly Society, the Cricket Club and the Football Club. The pub finally closed around 2017 and became a private home, though its Grade 2 listing protects its structure and its features. At the next junction we have a crossroads, and facing Vine Street stands the old fire station built in 1890 on the former site of the village lockup. Before this, Billingborough had no fire engine of its own and had to call for help from Folkingham, which often caused delays. In 1889, a group of local women formed a fundraising committee, and by January 1890 they'd raised enough to buy an engine of their own. The engine arrived at Billingborough railway station. It was a second-hand Merryweather machine, worked by 12 men and capable of throwing 70 gallons of water per minute to a height of 100 feet. A proper building was needed to house it, so the fire engine house was put up soon after, built in brick with an arched doorway onto Vine Street. It served until 1990, when a new station opened on the High Street. Today, the old building survives as a rare rural fire engine house of its period, but it's now in private ownership. This is the Old Hall, standing at the corner of the High Street and Vine Street. It's one of Billingborough's most striking historic buildings. It was built between 1611 and 1620 by William Toller, a prominent local figure, and long tradition holds that some of its stone came from nearby Sempringham Priory. The house later passed to William's son, Richard, who added to it, and the Toller family remained here until the mid-1800s. Their influence reached far beyond this building. Indeed, they founded John Toller's Free School, one of the village's earliest formal teaching institutions. The Old Hall is listed Grade 2, a status granted in 1952. Its listing describes a small country house of coursed limestone rubble with ashlar dressings, a collie western slate roof, stone-coped gables and ball finials. In the early 1800s, the hall became a seminary for young ladies. Miss Sills ran the school from 1815 to 1818, charging 20 guineas a year, including tea, and later Harriet Barber operated a boarding school here. By the 1870s, the building had taken on another unusual role when Dr. Kenyon used part of it to care for people with mental illness. That phase lasted at least a decade. After the death of owner Mr. Pilkington in 1898, the hall was divided into two residences. One later resident was Mary Jane Woolley, the benefactor who founded the Nest's Almshouses on Victoria Street in 1914. Today, the Old Hall remains a well-loved landmark. Now a residential care home, its historic structure survives intact, making it one of Billingborough's best documented and most characterful buildings. Okay, time for a walk along Vine Street next. Now, before we go down Vine Street, I just want to point out this house you can see behind me there. That is called New Inn House, and I suspect, I don't know for certain, but I suspect that was a pub at one time called the New Inn. You know, there's certainly some evidence for that, isn't there? Okay, so down Vine Street we go. Our next job is to find United Fillings. Further up Vine Street we reach United Fillings, today one of the village's best known employers, but only because of what operated here before it. This was Billingborough's famous feather factory, a business that began in the 1870s under local poulterer Tolly McCann. McCann had realised that the byproducts of his trade, goose and poultry feathers, held real commercial value. Across the Lincolnshire Fens, feather processing was booming, with Boston leading the industry, and Billingborough soon joined the network of smaller, rural suppliers feeding that demand. Goose quills were often used for writing, while the softer down from geese and swans was prized for pillows and mattresses. As large factories in Boston expanded, small works like the McCanns sprang up in nearby villages. Locally known as Falcon Mill, the Billingborough works handled feathers from surrounding farms and from birds processed on site. Feathers were cleaned, sorted, dried and packed. It was a labour-intensive, dusty and surprisingly skilled job. Though modest in scale, the factory generated steady traffic along Vine Street. Carts at first, then lorries carrying feathers, bedding materials and poultry. It became a familiar landmark and a daily workplace for many villagers. McCann died in 1915, but the business continued. The Aveland Archive holds a hand-coloured 1930s photograph of a feather factory lorry, its driver believed to be Bernard Meads, confirming the works were still active well into the interwar years. Its output fed a national market that by the early 1900s was shifting towards machine-made bedding, though hand-sorted rural feathers remained valued for their quality. By the mid-20th century, the industry was changing. Large firms such as Fogarty, which had taken over Boston's major factory in 1899, modernised production and gradually moved away from feather fillings. Synthetic materials rose instead, and small rural suppliers struggled to compete. The Billingborough works eventually faded, until United Fillings arrived in September 1990, bringing new life to the site as a major manufacturer of cushion interiors in foam, feather and fibre. On Chapel Street now, you'll see this house at the northern end. This was once the site of a chapel, but I don't know a lot about it. What I do know is that it was not the first chapel of its kind built in Billingborough. That building was at the other end of the street. More on that later. And that bungalow you can see there, didn't know this until I was literally stood right outside it, is called the Prim. So I'm assuming it was a primitive Methodist chapel that stood where that bungalow now is. Sometimes the clues are just in the nameplates on houses and things. Right, now we turn our attention to this thing. The church. We've reached the jewel in Billingborough's architectural crown, St Andrew's Church, standing at the heart of the village. A church here was recorded in the Domesday Book, though the present structure dates from the mid-13th or early 14th century. Some sources suggest 1251 or 1312 as the start of a major rebuilding. The earliest surviving features here include 13th century lancet windows, while the main body of the church is built in the decorated Gothic style of the 1300s. Its most striking feature is the 150-foot spire, a landmark that's visible for miles across the fen edge. The spire rises above a strong west tower of limestone rubble and ashlar. The whole building was listed Grade 1 in 1968. St Andrews has a long bell history. In 1717, Henry Penn of Peterborough installed 5 bells here. They were rehung in 1846, a new treble was added in 1914, and 2 more followed in 1952. By the late 1860s, the church needed a major repair. The nave roof was replaced in 1870, and a major restoration began on Easter Monday 1887, removing box pews, lifting the floor, and adding new oak benches and a carved pulpit. During this work, traces of medieval wall paintings were uncovered, including angel heads on the south aisle wall. The chancel, whose roof had once come from a barn at Burthorpe, was also failing by this time. One notable vicar was Robert Kellam, who served for 50 years until 1752 and also worked as the village schoolmaster. His son became a respected antiquarian and produced an illustrated edition of the Domesday Book. Beside St Andrew's Church stands New Springwell's Doctor's Surgery, overlooking the natural spring that gives the site its name. Before the surgery existed, this plot held a cottage, clearly visible in 1930s photographs showing the church with the old building where the medical centre now stands. The surgery was built in 1984, giving Billingborough its first purpose-built modern medical facility. It was positioned above the spring with windows facing the water, chosen for its central location near the High Street and its potential for future expansion. The building opened with consulting rooms, a waiting area and a small dispensary. Growth followed steadily. In 2007, a loft conversion added administration space, the practice manager's office, a drug preparation room, and secure storage. In 2010, 2 new consulting rooms and a large purpose-built dispensary were added to meet rising patient demand. A further rear extension arrived in 2012. Today, the surgery provides a full range of NHS services, from routine clinics to long-term condition management. Parking has also improved. The main car park beside the church now offers 19 spaces, including 2 reserved for patients with mobility difficulties. And you will have noticed, of course, I was actually stood in the churchyard to get those shots of the doctor's surgery, which is perfectly legal, of course. Okay, now we're on a footpath here, which goes through the churchyard and then passes this. I'm not quite sure what this is, but there is a path that runs through there. I'm not going down there though, that's just an option I suppose. If you're on this path you can turn left there. Instead I'm going straight down, and to the left is the village hall. We've reached the village hall, a building whose early history is frustratingly unclear. The earliest photographs in the Aveland archive already show it standing by the 1950s, including a monochrome view across fields with St Andrew's Church behind it. The first firm event linked to the hall is the 1953 coronation celebration. Earlier details are a bit sketchy. It became a registered charity in 1979 under the name Billingborough Parish Hall and was later renamed Billingborough Village Hall. Today it still hosts a full schedule and remains financially stable, surviving in near original form as Billingborough's main indoor venue. This is Brewery Lane, though Billingborough's brewery never stood here, so don't be misled by the name. The real site was the Great Northern Brewery, located on or near West Street, close to the old railway station. It was run by Trolley Thomas Houghton, whose business took its name from the Great Northern Railway, a sensible choice given the easy transport links for malt, hops and finished beer provided by the station nearby. The Aveland Archive records later industrial uses on the same West Street plot, including an ice cream factory in the 20th century. The former brewery buildings are now private homes, but again, they're not these houses on Brewery Lane. Even so, this street name still keeps alive the memory of a once important local industry.
Right, we're at the other end of Brewery Lane now. Now, if you turn left here, that takes you down towards Poynton and Sempringham. We'll see those at some point in the not too distant future. However, we haven't finished with Billingborough yet. We still have quite a bit of stuff to cover in this direction up here. Next up, we've got a big warehouse which dominates the corner you can see in front of you there.
On the corner of Burthorpe Road and the High Street stands one of Billingborough's most recognisable industrial buildings, the former Harrison's Corn Mill and Merchants. This tall, three-storey red brick warehouse has dominated the junction for decades. The business was founded by Henry Christopher Harrison, born in 1861. As a young man, he worked at the old Sale Mill at Stowe, where the 1891 census listed him as a miller and a baker. By 1900, he had moved into Billingborough and taken over a bakery and confectionery business on the lower High Street. Soon after, he shifted direction and became a miller and a corn merchant, operating from this large mill building at the Burthorpe Road corner. By 1911, the mill was well established. Its height and layout made it ideal for grain storage, bagging and mechanical milling, and Harrison was still listed as a corn miller in 1939. After his death in 1949, the business continued as H.C. Harrison & Son until around 1964, remembered by farmers and residents who visited during its final years. Milling ended in the 1960s, but the structure survived and was converted into flats in 1989, preserving its external form and its long-standing presence on the High Street. Across the High Street stands the Fortescue Arms, one of Billingborough's oldest surviving inns. It began as two houses with a single-storey south range dating from the early 1700s, with alterations in the early 1800s and again in 1855. The inn takes its name from the Earl Fortescue, long-time lord of the manor. In 1855, the entire Fortescue estate, including the inn, was purchased by Queen Victoria. White's Directory of 1856 lists the Fortescue Arms alongside the New Inn, the Crown, the George and Dragon and the Grapes, showing how busy Billingborough's drinking trade once was. A major turning point came in 1874 when brewer Trolley George Houghton bought the inn from the Crown. Under the Houghtons, the inn became a lively venue, hosting committee meetings, annual dinners, property sales and Crown estate rent audits. By the 1970s alterations, the Snug even served twice weekly as a bank agency. In 1972, the living room became a public bar, the old rooms were merged into a larger lounge, and the stables were converted into a dining room. The Fortescue coat of arms was moved indoors to hang above the fireplace, where it remains today apparently. Today, the Fortescue Arms remains open, the last surviving pub of the 7 once recorded in Billingborough, and it still carries the distinction of once being owned by Queen Victoria herself.
And this pub's connection with Queen Victoria you can see outside on the wall. Did you notice this? Look at this. You normally see these things on post boxes the VR signifying Victoria, and then you've got the crown, and I'm assuming that's Albert. I'm assuming the on the other side, I don't think I've ever seen that one before, but there you go, that's on the outside of the pub. This was Queen Victoria's at one time.
Billingborough's post office began life as a simple house built in red brick with ashlar dressings and a pantile mansard roof. It's now Grade 2 listed. The earliest known reference to this dates to 1828, when Mr. Peach, a druggist, sold his shop to William Westmoreland. By 1832, Westmoreland described himself as a chemist, a druggist, and an oil colourman, showing how busy the premises had become. When advertised for sale in 1846, it was praised as advantageously situate in the centre of the town. The next major figure involved with it was William Forster Smith, who ran both the drugstore and the post office for 47 years, making him one of Billingborough's longest-serving postmasters. His assistant, Edward Essam, succeeded him in 1893. Essam was a photographer, an amateur astronomer and a telescope maker, and he produced the commercial postcards of Billingborough High Street, which are still sold here today. A key development here came in 1909 when a public telephone call office was installed inside the post office. It was the village's first public telephone facility. A kiosk later appeared outside. The premises later traded as Cowley's, remaining both a shop and a post office until 2016, when it became Post and More. Remarkably, the original 19th century remedy cabinets from the days when this was a druggist still survive inside. This is the Co-op, a long-standing high street shop here in Billingborough. The earliest known photograph of this, held again in the Aveland archive, dates from the 1960s and shows it as the Billingborough branch of Grantham Cooperative Society. The exact opening date for this is unknown, but the image captures a classic rural co-op frontage with large display windows, bold signage and a simple rectangular form typical of the period. The Co-op ever since has remained a key retailer into the 21st century and is one of Billingborough's longest running commercial sites, firmly tied to Lincolnshire's cooperative tradition.
Okay, so now we've turned back onto Chapel Street at the other end, and there's three things I want to make you aware of here, just as you turn the corner. First of all, you've got a hairdresser's here called Heritage, which occupies the left-hand side of this big building, and next to that there's Blessett's Traditional Butchers. Now, believe it or not, that's a butcher's shop these days, but that, once upon a time, used to be a branch of Lloyd's TSB Bank. Can you believe that? Now, beyond these two, you have the chapel that we mentioned earlier. There's the old chapel next door to them. So, after these three things, we're now heading back towards the village hall, but we're going to turn left momentarily and head for the Springwells.
We're back at the Springwells, one of Billingborough's oldest and most distinctive features. Although it looks like a village pond, it's actually a group of natural artesian springs fed by the Lincolnshire limestone aquifer. Rain falling on the uplands near Grantham travels through dipping limestone strata and is forced upward under pressure here, giving the water its steady flow and slightly warm temperature. The water contains iron salts, once believed to have had health benefits. In cold weather, you can sometimes see steam rising, and the bubbling is often visible at the surface. The springs rarely freeze, and have only dried up twice in living memory. Once in 1967 or 1976, sources differ, and again in 2011 when the water vanished completely for 6 months. For centuries, the Springwells were Billingborough's main source of drinking and washing water. Until the late 1930s, villagers collected water by hand from cisterns placed at the springs. The 1904 Ordnance Survey map shows 2 springs, one on each side of the present pond. In 1887, a 300-gallon enamel-lined tank with 4 spouts was installed on the eastern spring after complaints about pollution. In 1902, a child fell into the tank but thankfully was rescued. Pretty much all the way around this walk, I've had a very nice smell drift past my nose, and here is the source of said smell. At the end of Church Street is Billingborough Fish Bar, and my god does it smell good. Next, we're back on the high street. At number 12 is a Nisa shop, but there's not really much we can say for this one. That said, the Billingborough branch forms part of a network of over 2,500 Nisas across the country. There's a fact I bet you didn't know. Next door is Billingborough's modern fire station, opened in 1990 to replace the cramped Victorian engine house on Vine Street. The new base was designed for larger appliances, modern equipment and proper training space. Today's station can reach incidents across the Aveland area far faster, with its high street position giving quick access to the main routes. Here on Station Road we reach the site of Billingborough's old railway station, opened in 1872 on the Great Northern Railway's Bourne to Sleaford line. Officially named Billingborough and Horbling Station, it also served nearby Folkingham. The station stood at the junction of today's Station Road and Folkingham Road. It had 2 platforms, a goods yard, a weighhouse and a station master's house. Early photographs show a neat brick building with a long canopy and a tidy yard. Freight dominated the trade. Livestock, mainly cattle, sheep, pigs, and during the June Stowe Fair, hundreds of horses passed through here. Coal also arrived for the Vine Street gasworks, and agricultural machinery came in by rail too. Passenger services were steady but secondary. Trains ran between Bourne and Sleaford, but excursion trains were the real draw. Villagers travelled to Nottingham Goose Fair, Hull Fair, and even Bellevue in Manchester, with special trains well advertised. The station had long-serving staff. J.E. Harrison, for example, was station master for 22 years, retiring in 1908. He was followed by a Mr. Mountain. Mr. Hale, a signalman, served 27 years from 1906, and Harry Robinson, a permanent weighman, worked on the line for 47 years, retiring in 1946. Passenger services ended in 1930, though goods traffic continued until 1964. After closure, the site was taken over by Grimer's Transport Limited, whose yard occupied much of the area from 1951 onwards. Some structures do survive, including the waiting room, the weighhouse, and sections of the platform edge, which remain visible today. Right, that's pretty much it. We've gone around virtually all of Billingborough there. Very big village, isn't it? And there's still bits that I didn't walk to. For example, the gasworks. That was something I didn't go to. It's right at the end of Vine Street, that. But I'm not walking all the way down there because there's nothing there anymore, as far as I can tell. Anyway, the point is that we've got around Billingborough, and I've covered, you know, quite a lot of it in one go there. There is a small village, or hamlet, which is also tied to Billingborough. It goes by the name of Burthorpe. And to finish with, we're going to drive through that. To finish our route, we reach Burthorpe, less than a mile west of Billingborough. Small as it looks today, it's one of the most historically dense settlements in the Aveland area. The present cluster of houses and farm buildings hides the fact that Burthorpe is a shrunken medieval village. Earthworks around the hamlet mark former house plots, trackways and paddocks, revealing a settlement once far larger than what you see now. The village name appears in medieval records, and by the 1200s the Burthorpe family had established a manor here. The most notable figure was Roger de Burthorpe, appointed Chief Baron of the Irish Exchequer in 1327. His career was dramatic. He fled to Ireland after being outlawed during a violent dispute with Sempringham Priory, later receiving a royal pardon. The manor passed to the Danecourt family before 1343, and by the post-medieval period, the estate centred on what is now Burthorpe Manor House. The manor house is Grade 2 listed, by the way. Its earliest parts date from the mid-17th century, with major additions in the mid-18th and late 19th centuries too. It forms a U-shaped courtyard, once part of a larger farmstead with extensive outbuildings. Burthorpe originally belonged to Sempringham parish, but became a separate civil parish in 1866. Its independence, though, was short-lived. In 1931 it was abolished and merged with Billingborough. When it stood alone, it had an intriguing feature: a detached eastern portion. Historic boundary maps show a separate block of land lying east of Billingborough. Such detached places were common in medieval Lincolnshire, often created through piecemeal land grants, inheritance divisions, or monastic holdings. Burthorpe's detached area likely linked outlying fields to the manor, despite their physical separation. Today, though, it's all part of Billingborough once more, but the hamlet still carries the weight of its long, complex past. Billingborough is a fabulous village. There are so many aspects to it which make it interesting. At its heart stands St Andrew's Church, rising above the high street with its tall spire and long architectural timeline. Just steps away, the spring wells bubble with steady pressure from the limestone aquifer. It's that natural feature that supplied the village with water for generations. Around the core, its commercial and industrial past becomes clearer in several forms. I'm talking about the old railway station, the brewery, and Harrison's Corn Warehouse. And we can't dismiss the high street shops, nor the pub once owned by Queen Victoria. Billingborough is a village of work, faith, water, trade, and steady reinvention, and it's great in all ways.
I'm on Vine Street where the carts once rolled, sorting goose down in the old Falcon mill. Dust in the air, but the craft stays bold, keeping pace with every sack I fill. Feathers clean, dried, packed with skill each day. Work that shaped this stretch in its own way. By the warehouse wall where the wagon stood, grain on my boots and the floorboards worn. Railway rumble through the timber and wood, early shift breaking with the light each morn. Corn piled high in the merchant store, Billingborough graft at its core. Spring well shining by the church so tall, spire climbing over every street and hall. Voices working through the years that grew, Billingborough moving as the old days flew. Boston's trade pulled our feathers along, quills for the desks and the soft down sold. Lorries later joined the village throng, still we kept the rhythm strong and bold. Bernard Meads drove the lorry through, color on the photo proving what we knew. By the siding's edge where the grain once lay, steam in the air as the wagons creaked. Every harvest shaped another day, every season's wait was what we'd seek. Corn merchants' pride in the work we bore, Billingboro's pulse at the warehouse door. Spring well shining by the church so tall, spire climbing over every street and hall. Voices working through the years that grew, change fast when the fibers came. Forgot his rise, left the small work strain. Still we kept going till the end of the game, till united feelings took what remained. Feather days fading, but the craft stayed near. Vine Street carried every shift we'd steer. Grain dust settled where the ledger slept. Old stone standing through the years that passed. Every sack lifted, every promise kept. Work, build steady, build strong, build fast. Warehouse shadow on the village floor. Billingborough's graft at the old front door. Old hall watching where the tollers stayed. Fire engine house where the women paid. For the engine brought in a bold new day, and the Fortescue thrived under royal sway. Spring well shining by the church so tall. Spire climbing over every street and hall. Voices working through the years that grew. Billingborough moving as the old days. Spring well shining where the water runs. Vine Street humming with the work we've done. Warehouse standing with the grain once stored. Railway rumble through the goods we poured. By the brewery tied to the station side. Cash rolled steady with the brewer's pride. Shining by the church so tall. Voices rising through the village call. Billingborough working through every age. Riding its life on a living
Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven for the last episode this week, and this is the one I've proper been looking forward to because it's got a heck of a story to tell you. Now behind me, I'll just hop out of the way here, you can see we have a memorial. Now you won't be able to read what's on the memorial because it's too small, but you'll soon learn what's on there. This is to do with a Welsh princess, and not just any old Welsh princess, the last native Welsh princess. Now believe it or not, the princess in question never actually saw Wales, and that's because for her entire life her home was here in the Lincolnshire countryside, and somewhere over there said princess is buried, but nobody knows where. Her name was Gwenllian, and this is the parish of Poynton and Sempringham. Poynton and Sempringham, Puna's farmstead and Semmer's homestead. Wrapping up the week this time around, we have the parish of Poynton and Sempringham to see. This consists of two villages, but one of them is little more than just a collection of houses and a church. Mind you, it's that one which is by far the most historically important. The area now forming the parish of Poynton and Sempringham lies on the western edge of the Lincolnshire Fens. The name Poynton is thought to come from the Old English Punington, meaning the farmstead of Puma's people or the enclosure of Puna's group. Sempringham appears in early records as Steppingham or Sempingham, likely meaning the homestead of the followers of a man called Semp or Semmer. Both names indicate Anglo-Saxon origins tied to small groups that established farmsteads on the fen edge. They developed as separate settlements during the early medieval period. It was Sempringham that gained particular importance in the 12th century due to the life of Gilbert of Sempringham. He was born in around 1083 and was the son of the local lord. Gilbert founded the Gilbertine order, which we're familiar with already from many other places. It was the only monastic order created in England, and understandably his foundation of Sempringham Priory in the 1130s turned the area into a huge centre of religious significance. Poynton, meanwhile, grew as an agricultural settlement and stayed more focused on farming.
That village is now the much larger of the two, despite the fact it's Sempringham that gets all the visitors now. We'll put them both on the map though, as usual. During the medieval period, Sempringham Priory became the dominant landholder around here, as the Gilbertine order expanded across England and the priory held extensive estates, including land in Poynton, Burthorpe and the surrounding fen. The priory operated until the dissolution of the monasteries in 1538, when its lands were seized by the Crown. After the dissolution, the Clinton and Manners families would take over. Over the following centuries, the land was divided among various gentry and other farming families. Now, despite that, Sempringham had become a centre for Puritan activity. Samuel Skelton, a curate of Sempringham, later sailed to Massachusetts in 1628, and Anne Dudley, later Anne Bradstreet, became the first published poet of the American colonies. Poynton, in contrast, had nothing like that as historical stories go, and sort of minded its own business until it was merged with Sempringham in 1931. That formed the modern parish, and so today we have an episode with two for the price of one. Let's dive in. St Andrew's Church is the only place you can truly begin the story of Sempringham. Standing alone on a rise between Poynton and Billingborough, it looks out across the Lincolnshire fens and marks the heart of the vanished medieval village. More than that, it's the parish church of Gilbert of Sempringham, founder of the Gilbertine order and one of Lincolnshire's most significant historical figures. The earliest stonework dates from the 12th century, when the church was rebuilt shortly after Gilbert's birth. The nave walls still carry late Norman masonry, with simple round arches typical of the period. In its earliest centuries, the church stood beside the first buildings of Sempringham Priory, and for a time the parish church and the priory church functioned side by side. Gilbert himself served here as the priest before establishing the only monastic order created in England. As the priory grew in influence, St Andrew's expanded with it. During the 13th and 14th centuries, the chancel was rebuilt with tall lancet windows, a south aisle was added, and the lower stages of the present tower were constructed. Gilbertine records mention roof repairs, payments to masons, and gifts of timber from local estates, showing how closely the church was tied to the life of the priory and its visitors. The dissolution of 1538 swept away the priory, but St Andrew's survived. From that moment, it became the principal standing witness to Gilbert's world. Later centuries brought steady repair, new battlements on the tower, box pews and a pulpit inside, and finally the major 1868 restoration by Edward Browning. He rebuilt the chancel arch, renewed the roofs and inserted new south aisle windows, giving the church much of its present form while still preserving its medieval character. Inside, the church holds a 12th century font, a medieval piscina and fragments of carved stone reused from the priory. Today, St Andrew's is the only surviving medieval building directly linked to Gilbert's life, rightly listed Grade 1 and regarded as a quiet place of pilgrimage. It's a rare, enduring fragment of the Gilbertine world. Of course, the church is only half the story. St Andrew stands beside the earthworks of Sempringham Priory, once the headquarters of the Gilbertine order, the only monastic order created in England. The buildings have long vanished, but the ground still holds the outlines of its past. The priory began in the 1130s when Gilbert, son of the local lord, returned from studies in France and took charge of the parish church. A group of local women wished to pursue a religious life, and Gilbert built simple accommodation for them beside the church. The community grew rapidly. Lay brothers, clerks and servants were added, forming a mixed religious house unlike anything else in England. This unusual structure became the foundation of the Gilbertine order, formally recognised by the Pope in 1148. Through the 12th and 13th centuries, the priory expanded its lands, its livestock and rights across Lincolnshire and beyond. Royal favour strengthened its position. Henry II offered support, and later monarchs confirmed its privileges. At its height, Sempringham controlled estates in at least 9 counties, earning income from rents, mills and wool. As the mother house of the entire order, it held immense influence. Women here lived in an enclosed section with their own cloister, dormitory and workrooms. Men, meanwhile, lived separately with their own cloister and hall. Archaeology has traced these divisions, along with the footprint of the priory church, fish ponds, barns and guest facilities. The priory was dissolved in 1538. Its buildings were stripped for stone, and much of that stone still survives in nearby farm buildings and in the old hall at Poynton. They are quiet reminders of a once powerful religious centre. Well, let me tell you folks, this is definitely a special place. You drive for what seems like an age to get to this church up the track off the main road. And when you get here, you're basically surrounded by countryside. Yeah, you've got the site of the priory, but there's no buildings there anymore. It's just all lumps and bumps and earthworks. There are no houses. Nobody lives down here. This building is the only thing you can see for a long way around. You can hear the road in the distance, the rush of the cars going past, but that's really about the only signs of life, human life, you actually have here. The fact that it is well out of the way though is actually rather important when you consider the next bit of its story. You see, I don't have any Welsh blood in me. I've pretty much got no connection to Wales at all, apart from being a fan of the Manic Street Preachers. But there was, at one time, a Welsh princess who called this part of Lincolnshire home, although she didn't know much about it. Now, Sempringham Priory has an extraordinary link to Wales. Even though we're a long way from the valleys, anyone with Welsh blood will want to pause here. This is where Gwenllian Fyrsh Llewellyn, daughter of Llewellyn ap Gruffydd, spent her entire life. As Llewellyn was the final native prince of Wales, Gwenllian was the last native princess. She was born in 1282, right in the middle of the final struggle between the Welsh princes and King Edward I. Her mother, Eleanor de Montfort, died soon after childbirth, and only months later Llewellyn was killed himself. Edward I moved fast to secure Wales. Gwenllian, still a baby, was captured at Dolwydlin Castle and taken from her homeland. As the last direct heir of the Welsh royal line, she was considered too politically dangerous to leave in Wales. In 1283, the infant princess was brought to Sempringham Priory. The site was remote, controlled, and ideal for keeping a royal prisoner out of reach. Royal accounts record annual payments for her food, clothing, and care for more than 40 years. Gwenllian lived entirely within the women's section of the priory, following the strict routine of the nuns. Because she arrived so young, no one knows whether she ever learned of her father's status, or indeed of her own. Her confinement was gentle but total. She never left the priory grounds. Royal clerks checked on her occasionally, but her life remained quiet, enclosed, and far removed from Wales. She died here in 1337, aged about 55, and was buried somewhere within the priory precinct. The exact spot was lost after the dissolution in 1538. Today, a memorial stands on the track leading to the site, a place of pilgrimage for Welsh visitors who come to honour the princess who never, ever saw her homeland. Okay, so just in case you couldn't read what was on the memorial, I will read it to you. It's written in both Welsh and English, and I'm glad it's in English because I can't speak a word of Welsh. So here's what it says. First of all, you've got the dates. That's her date of birth, 12th of June 1282, and her death date, 7th of June 1337. Princess, of course. Born at Garthchelyn, Aber, Gwynedd. At 18 months old, she was abducted by Edward I and held captive here at Sempringham Abbey for the rest of her life. And like I said, somewhere out there, the princess's grave is within all those earthworks. Christ Church stands at the northern end of Poynton, built during the great wave of Victorian church construction that reshaped rural Lincolnshire. Until then, villagers had to travel nearly 2 miles to Sempringham for worship, and by the 19th century the growing settlement wanted a church of its own. The result was Christ Church, compact, confident and purpose-built for Poynton's needs. The Manor House on Millthorpe Road is one of Poynton's most significant historic buildings. Although the village never had a major manorial estate like Sempringham or Burthorpe, this house became Poynton's leading residence. Built of limestone rubble with ashlar dressings, its earliest fabric dates from the 1600s, when a substantial farmhouse with a 2-room plan and central stack stood here. As the farm prospered, the house was enlarged and later remodelled to suit 18th century tastes. Sash windows were added and the front elevation was regularised, with a date stone suggesting work around 1730 to 1740. Despite its name, it was never a true manor house. The title reflects, though, its local status. Some of its stonework was reused from the ruins of Sempringham Priory, linking it directly to the area's deeper past. This is Poynton School, and it's called St Gilbert's C of E Primary, named after Gilbert of Sempringham. Though modern compared with the medieval sites nearby, its history is well documented and reflects the development of rural education. The school began in the 19th century. Before it existed, Poynton children attended small dame schools or travelled to Sempringham, where lessons were held in cottages or farm buildings. The 1870 Education Act pushed communities to provide proper schooling, and Poynton followed quickly. The first purpose-built school opened in the 1870s. It was a brick building with a slate roof. Early logbooks record around 40 to 50 pupils, with numbers rising during harvest when labourers' families passed through. During the Second World War, evacuee children were taken in here.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm halfway around Poynton and it's just as quiet as Sempringham was. Mind you, there's a few more houses here. Now, let's continue down this road that the school is on, and in a second we'll be touching the main road that runs through Poynton from north to south. We'll be seeing the old Chip Inn, we'll be seeing a garage, and we'll be seeing the village hall. There's quite a few more bits still to cover here.
Poynton once had its own Methodist chapel, built as Methodism spread rapidly across the Aveland area. The village joined the Bourne Wesleyan Circuit, which encouraged new chapels during the 1860s as membership grew. Poynton's chapel opened in 1868. It was a simple red brick building with a slate roof, set slightly back from the road to the northern side of the village. It remained active into the 1960s, but closed in the 1970s after more than a century of use. The building was later demolished, and modern houses now occupy this site where it once stood. Poynton's one and only pub is the Old Ship Inn, an unusual name for an inland village. It makes more sense though when you remember how watery the fens once were. Fen drainage schemes often use nautical terms, and the ship name may also link to old carriers' routes that crossed this landscape. The earliest firm reference to the old ship appears in the 1842 Bourne Petty Sessions licensing records, when William Taylor, a farmer publican, was running it alongside his small holding. The building itself likely dates from the late 18th or early 19th century. Early maps show a yard, stables and outbuildings behind the inn, and it regularly hosted parish meetings, livestock sales and inquest hearings, as well as serving drinks. In the early 20th century, the pub continued to thrive. It passed through the hands of Newark Brewery and later Warwick's and Richardson's, both active investors in rural Lincolnshire pubs. It even stayed open during the Second World War, with blackout boards fitted to the windows and the local Home Guard sometimes gathering here after training. After the war, the old Ship Inn remained a key social hub for Poynton, home to darts teams, domino leagues and harvest celebrations. Poynton Garage sits opposite the old Ship Inn and has long been one of the village's most practical businesses. Before it existed, Poynton relied on blacksmiths, carriers and bicycle repairers. The arrival of motor vehicles after the First World War created new demand for fuel, repairs and mechanical skills, and the garage grew directly from that shift. The earliest reference to a motor workshop here appears in 1930s trade directories listing H.W. Smith as a motor engineer. His small workshop stood on the site that later became Poynton Garage. After the Second World War, the business entered its busiest period. Rising car ownership meant rural garages became essential, and by the 1950s, Poynton Garage had fuel pumps, a forecourt, a workshop and a small office. In the 1960s, the Robinson family expanded the workshop and added new equipment. Servicing tractors and farm machinery became a major part of the trade, reflecting the agricultural character of the Aveland area. Fuel sales increased in the 1970s, but the 1980s brought challenges from rising prices and competition from larger garages. Today it no longer sells fuel, but it continues as a repair garage, keeping the village's cars, tractors and machinery running, just as it has for generations. Okay, we started this walk on Queensway, and to get back to the start from here you've got two options. Either you can turn right here down a footpath that leads to Queensway, or you can carry on down this road and complete the circuit of Poynton. Have a guess which one I'm doing. Poynton's playing field has been the village's main recreational space for decades. Before it existed, football and cricket were played on informal grass areas or borrowed farmland. After the Second World War, the parish began pushing for a proper field, and 1950s council minutes show early discussions about securing land large enough for organised sport. The field was purchased in the early 1960s using parish funds, local fundraising and support from National Playing Fields Association. It was levelled, fenced and seeded soon after. By 1965, Poynton teams were hosting matches against villages across the Aveland area, and a sports and social club quickly followed. The football pitch became home to Poynton FC, active through the 1980s and 1990s, whilst summer cricket matches brought in teams from nearby villages. Further improvements in the 2000s included pavilion refurbishment, upgraded pitch drainage and new play equipment. Activity levels have varied over time, but the playing field remains Poynton's main outdoor space, a long-standing hub for sports, events and community life. Poynton Village Hall is the village's main communal building, and its story begins in the years after the Second World War. Parish council minutes from the 1950s show early efforts to raise money for a proper hall, matching the push that also created the playing field. The original building was a straightforward brick rectangle with a tiled roof, timber windows, a small porch, a main hall, a kitchen and basic storage. By the 1970s it was a busy venue, hosting elections, parish meetings, table tennis sessions and local events. Today, Poynton Village Hall remains an active, well-used space. It may be modest in scale, but it's still central to village life. It supported Poynton's social and organisational heartbeat for more than 60 years, and the locals would not be without it. Poynton and Sempringham are a really interesting pair of places, aren't they? Sempringham provides the deep historical anchor. Its early medieval origins, the rise of Gilbert of Sempringham, and the creation of the Gilbertine order placed it on the national stage. The priory's influence spread far beyond Lincolnshire, yet its physical presence shaped the land around it for generations. Even after its fall in 1538, the earthworks and the enduring presence of St Andrew's Church keep Sempringham's importance firmly in view. Poynton, by contrast, grew as a practical agricultural settlement, but it wouldn't be what it is without its northern neighbour. Together, Poynton and Sempringham form a parish where medieval foundations and modern life sit side by side and remain firmly connected.
The sisters at first light's call, stone walls steady me through each passing day. Paths worn by footsteps guide my small world, fields stretching far where the fen winds play. Voices in chapel shape all I know, workrooms humming with calm routine. I've never stepped past the outer bounds, yet life here feels ordered, safe, serene. They say the land beyond is wide, but this place holds all I've seen. Sempringham keeps me sheltered, a life shaped by prayer and care. Poynton lies further onward, but I've never wandered there. All I know is this cloister, these halls where my days begin. Sempringham holds my whole stillness in. Sisters move softly through timbered rooms, their rhythm steady as seasons turn. I hear the workers out by the fields, tending the earth with steady concern. Sometimes I watch through narrow stone, seeing the towers stand firm and tall. They speak of a church near the village edge, guarding the rise above it all. I wonder what lies past these walls, but wonder is all I bring. Sempringham keeps me sheltered, a life shaped by prayer and care. Poynton lies further onward, but I've never wandered there. All I know is this cloister, these halls where my days begin. Sempringham holds my whole world, and I let its stillness in. Sometimes the sisters mention the past, old farms, old tracks, old fields once shared. They speak of a house in Poynton's heart, built long ago by people who cared. They talk of a chapel that once stood near, and a school where the children learn. All these places feel far away, though none lie beyond a short turn. I watch the sky through narrow stone and dream without knowing why. Sempringham keeps me sheltered, a life shaped by prayer and care. Poynton lies further onward, but I've never wandered there. All I know is this cloister, these halls where my days begin. Sempringham holds my whole world, and I let its stillness in.
Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.